This day in sports history. It's March 12th, and on this day in 1944, a secret basketball game was played in the heart of North Carolina. The city of Durham in 1944 was a city divided along racial lines, just like the rest of the South under Jim Crow laws. There were restrictions on the intermingling of blacks and whites, and those codes and laws were enforced with violence. Not too long before this secret game happened, a black serviceman home on leave moved a little bit too slowly in giving up his seat on a bus and moving to the back for the bus driver's taste. The bus driver murdered that black soldier. A white Duke student who expressed his dislike for the disparate seating arrangements on the bus. Well, the white student was threatened with a knife by that bus driver and forced off. A group of students from Duke visited the historically black college, now known as North Carolina Central, in early 1944, to discuss politics and other things. Many of those students were kids who had grown up in the North or out West where Jim Crow laws did not exist. They wanted to push for change, but with the police vigorously maintaining the color barrier with violence, they didn't know exactly what to do. In fact, just to travel to these meetings on the central campus, the white students hid on the floor of the car. The North Carolina college basketball team had just wrapped up an exceptional season, losing just once. Behind the coaching of John McClendon, the Eagles ran a high-tempo offense that few had seen in the South. They may have been the best team in the state and one of the best in the nation if they'd been given the opportunity to prove it. But the NCAA and NIT postseason tournaments did not invite black teams, and so they were left to wonder. During one of the meetings between the Duke and North Carolina college students, basketball came up. The Duke students were proud of their Southern Conference champion Blue Devils, but they said that that team was not even the best on campus. Because it was wartime, the Army and Navy had training programs on college campuses, and with that, the intramural teams had top college athletes from all around the country. Well, Duke's medical school intramural team was said to be the best of the best, so a plan was hatched. How about we get the teams together and play a game? Everybody in that room knew that a racially mixed game would be illegal and also asking for trouble. When the idea was brought to McClendon, he was all for it. He would open up the gym for the Duke team and have a referee and a clock. It would be a legitimate game. When the idea was brought to the Duke medical team, at first there was stunned silence, a little pushback from a few who were concerned what getting caught would do to their futures. But then a prideful acknowledgement that they could beat this team on the other side of the tracks. March 12, 1944, dawned as a blustery day in Durham. It was a Sunday, and this day was specifically chosen to lessen the chance of getting caught by white police officers or nosy Nellies who would instead be at church. At 11 a.m., the Duke players piled into two cars. They took a meandering path to the North Carolina college campus in an effort to make sure that they were not followed and to disguise their destination as much as possible. When they arrived, the white players covered their heads with their jackets and walked into the small brick gymnasium. The doors were quickly locked. There were no spectators allowed and no media. The Eagles were dressed in their maroon jerseys, and the Duke fellas had their blue uniforms. And there was a palpable nervous energy, and stomachs were churning. One of the black players, named Aubrey Stanley, said many years later that he had never played against white players prior to this. A quick assessment was made by both teams, and Stanley, who played center for the Eagles, and once he saw that the man that he was going to be guarding was about 4 inches shorter than him, said he didn't think the game was going to be a problem. But there were a lot of questions still hanging in the air. What would happen if there was a hard foul or a fight broke out? How bad would things get if word of this interracial game leaked outside of these walls? The teams met in the center jump circle. The ball was put into the air, and the secret game was underway. Nervousness played a big role in the first possessions. Shots were clanged, passes were intercepted, easy layups were missed. A constant looking over at the door to make sure it was still locked. But soon, nerves settled, and the players settled into a rhythm. Shots began to fall. Passes found their mark. The Eagles picked up the tempo. The Duke Meds settled down and ran give-and-goes and launched two-handed set shots that swished the net. Stanley was the youngest of the Eagle players at only 16. 10 minutes into the first half, he took a peek at the scoreboard and realized that they could beat these guys, that the other guys were just men like them. The score was close at the halftime break, but the Eagles blew things open in the second half, scoring nearly every time they had the ball. The fast-breaking, wide-open style was overwhelming for the Duke players. And when the clock expired to end it, North Carolina College had doubled up the Devil Docs 88-44. But the men weren't done just yet. They decided to play a second game, but this time they split up, mixing the teams in the first ever known interracial basketball game in the Jim Crow South. They went shirts and skins to play this one, and as one of the Eagle players said, it was just God's children horsing around with a basketball. But word had leaked that something strange was going on inside the gym. The doors were still locked, but faces started to appear in the windows as North Carolina College students climbed up to the window ledges to catch a glimpse of what was happening. But those black students who saw with their own eyes from beyond the glass did not tell anyone beyond the campus, and the Durham police never caught wind of this interracial game, nor did the two white-owned newspapers. There was a black reporter who heard about this game, but he was sworn to secrecy, and he never printed a word about it. The game would remain a secret to the outside world until 1996, when Duke historian Scott Ellsworth uncovered the story, researched it, and then wrote an article for the New York Times. He eventually wrote a book titled The Secret Game, a wartime story of courage, change, and basketball's lost triumph, released in 2015. After this second game ended, the teams drifted over to the men's residence hall to talk and get to know each other a little bit better. One of the Duke players from Montana wrote a letter to his family a few days later, and he mentioned the game and how most of his teammates were from the South. He ended the note writing, "When the evening was over, most of them had changed their views quite a lot." This episode is brought to you by the Stirling Soap Company. I'm a big fan of shave soap. I've been using different brands for years, and I recently gave Stirling's shave soaps a try, and I've been very happy with the results. Stirling's shave soaps give you a great lather and a frictionless feel that allows the razor to glide right over the skin for a super close shave. No skin irritation and a clean, refreshing feel with no soapy residue after. I can tell you without a doubt, it's simply the best shave I've ever had. And my wife has noticed too. And here's the thing. With the ability to purchase 1-ounce sample pucks, you can try out different scents to find the right one for you. Give Stirling Soap a try today. Visit stirlingsoap.com. That's STIRLING soap.com. On this day in 1985, Larry Bird dropped a career-high 60 on the Atlanta Hawks in a game played in New Orleans. The Hawks' attendance had been sagging in the mid-'80s, even with the dynamic Dominique Wilkins in the lineup. In '85, Wilkins was averaging 27 points a game for a very average Hawks team. The finances of the team were not great, and the franchise was considering a move to New Orleans. The New Orleans Jazz had booked it for Utah 6 years previous. The Hawks decided to play 12 of their home games in the Crescent City at the Lakefront Arena on the University of New Orleans campus. Interest had been mostly lukewarm in New Orleans for their previous 9 games. Even with a rookie Michael Jordan, the Hawks game with the Chicago Bulls 2.5 months earlier had managed to sell a little more than half the seats. But on this night, with the defending world champion Boston Celtics in town, the place was packed to the gills to watch Bird, McHale, and Parrish go up against Neek, Doc Rivers, and Eddie Johnson. The folks who bought a ticket that night got more value than they paid for. Bird was phenomenal, showcasing his wide spectrum of abilities, knocking down shots from every spot on the floor.
They open the right side. Bird the follow away. He drills it again. That's the best shooting I've ever seen in the game.
Yes, indeed.
Dennis Johnson, a lead for Bird.
They want him to keep scoring, too.
Bird takes the jumper and hits it again. Bird has 54.
Bird had been around the league for 6 years at this point, but he still had the ability to amaze not only the fans in the stands, but also other players in the league. The Celtics were shooting in front of the Hawks bench in the second half, and it's really fun to watch the bench players reacting in disbelief to every bucket Bird hit. They knew they were watching greatness, as did the 10,000 who saw it live. He set the Celtics record for points in a game, passing the record of 56 set by Kevin McHale 9 days prior, when he had a pair of free throws. With the time ticking down and nobody begrudging Bird a final shot, he took it.
And with 3 seconds, Bird will try another jumper and hit it at the buzzer. Bird has 60 points. Larry Bird scored 60 points. Look at the Boston players mob him. Larry Bird scored 60. It is the greatest shooting exhibition I've ever seen in my life. Larry Bird, one more impossible shot after the other.
The Celtics won 126-115. Dominique, who scored 36 for the Hawks in the losing effort, said it was like watching a video game. As for the Hawks playing in New Orleans, this was a one-year experiment that, outside of this game and to a much lesser extent the Chicago game, was a failed experiment. And of course, the Hawks never moved or played any more games in New Orleans after this season. On this day in 1966, Chicago Blackhawk Bobby Hull scored his 51st goal of the season. Montreal's Maurice Richard had been the first man to score 50 in a season back in 1945, and it took another 16 years before another Montreal Canadien, Bernie Geoffrion, could equal the Rockets' 50-goal plateau. Prior to 1969, scoring 50 goals in a season was a bit rare, but after the schedule was expanded to 80 games, it became more common. The league was playing a 70-game schedule at this point, and this was game number 61 on the schedule for Chicago. Hull had actually scored 50 earlier in his career, doing it the year after Geoffrion, but all 3 of those guys scored exactly 50. Well, on this night, Hull scored number 51.
Now then, Bobby Hull from his own blue line. The Golden Jet driving at center, in on the Ranger defense. Getting set, he may pass or shoot, he drives one. And the crowd goes wild here in Chicago. Bobby Hull has broken the all-time scoring record of 51 goals in a single season, and the crowd are going crazy. The ice is being completely littered with hats and popcorn and papers and rubbers and shoes. A blistering drive by number 9, Bobby Hull, who now is being congratulated by all his teammates on the far side. If you saw that one, you saw hockey history in the making. You may never ever see that again in your lifetime. Bobby Hull scoring 51 goals during a regular season.
Well, the Golden Jet actually did it 2 more times. He finished with 54 in the 66 season, came back the next year to score 52, and then when the schedule expanded in 1969, he scored 58 goals. And time now for today's That's Got Nothing to Do with Sports fun fact. On this day in 1951, two completely different and independent versions of Dennis the Menace debuted on comic pages, one in the UK and the other in the US. The two artists were not aware of the other, but once they found out about their comic doppelganger, neither was concerned about copyright infringement, and so they each had long runs. This has been an original Thrive Suite production.